all here in the church and also to those people watching and listening online. Now, your committee, as you know, is taking a cautious approach with regard to COVID-related things. But at our next meeting of the committee in a week's time, we will be considering going back to having morning teas, which I think we'll all be happy about if that happens. No promises, but I'm hopeful. And also we'll consider whether we'll continue with the online option, and my pick is that the committee would like to continue with the online option. There'll be a funeral here in St Christopher's after our meeting. I think it's at 1:30. And that funeral is for Brian Hunter. Now, just a little about Brian. Brian was one of a small group who set up Rutherford U3A 20 years ago. So he had a pivotal part in how we were all here. Brian was the first secretary and the third president of Rutherford U3A, and so our thoughts go to his wife, Bet. That's all the announcements for today, other than those of you who have cell phones in your pockets or bags, please turn them off. And I'll now ask Margaret to introduce our speaker.
Susan Nicola Bagshaw. You are most... Oh, I beg your pardon. I'll take this off, shall I? I want to give you a very, very warm welcome back to U3A. Do you know that she provided the most understated CV? Sue, born in Hong Kong, wife, mother and grandmother, a doctor specialising in adolescent youth health and development and working to set up a youth hub for services, creativity and transition housing. And she's also a senior lecturer in paediatrics at the Christchurch School of Medicine. Now, I'm going to tell you about the real Susan. She graduated BSc cum laude in 1971 and MB, Bachelor of Surgery, in 1974 from the University of London. She is a Fellow of the Australian Chapter of Sexual Health Medicine of the Royal Australian College of Physicians and a Fellow of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. President of the International Association of Adolescent Health and a founding member and key driver of the Society for Youth Health Professionals, Aotearoa. Sue was appointed CNZM in the 2002 New Year Honours, and then, to our delight, in June 2019, she became Dame Susan Nicola for services to health. We were all so pleased with your recognition, Susan, and I know I've got to say that and not Dame Susan, but never mind. So I wrote you at the time a congratulatory message, found an address on Mr. Google, and to my utter astonishment, 2 weeks later it was returned address unknown. So this is my opportunity to warmly congratulate you on becoming Dame Susan. So now, having got to know her a little bit better, over to you, Dame Susan.
Thank you, Margaret. It's nice to be busy, as I always say. But yes, I do wear a number of hats, but thank you for your very kind introduction. I don't know why Mr. Google gave you the wrong address, but thank you anyway. Well, after all that lot, I can go home. But you've asked me to talk about youth mental health and also an update on the Youth Hub. So I thought I'd start with youth mental health purely because the hub is really about trying to make the mental ill health of young people better. That's what it's all about, really. That's the purpose of it, really. So I'll start off with, first of all, what do you think mental health is? What's mental health? Feeling good about yourself, like it. Happiness? Yep. I was just going to say slightly overrated, but probably I would like to say contentment. Does that sound better? Cool. Any other things about what mental health is?
Well, I would have said being grounded.
Being grounded, nice.
Relating well to other people.
Relating well, absolutely. Good relationships, vital. Yeah.
Happy in your own skin.
Happy in your own skin, love it. Cool. Integrity, love it. So there's lots and lots of things, and I'm so glad you focused on health. Why do we call mental illness services mental health services? And often people say to me, she's got mental health. And I go, oh, good. Why do we do that? Any ideas? Stigma, absolutely, yeah. And it's not that long ago, and there's still these attitudes around to say, if you're mentally ill, you're evil. If you're mentally ill, you're weak. If you're mentally ill, it's you're the problem. And we all know that mental illness is just like any other illness. And it's a bit random, but there's lots of factors that go towards it. So the WHO kind of statement about what mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Isn't that a great definition? And I'm sure all of you do all of that. Well, fair bit. And lots of tips, sleep well, all the usual things. Sleep well, eat well, exercise well, reach out, don't have too much alcohol or other drugs, and contribute, offer stuff. So what then is mental illness? I think this picture is the wrong way round, because I think often the tears are on the inside, and there's a face on the outside that says, I'm okay, when on the inside you're feeling dreadful. Yeah? And there's various different labels for various different mental illnesses. And really the labels are put together by a group of psychiatrists from all around the world who meet every 5 years and decide on what to label things how. So the labels change a bit, and it's a group of symptoms, and you put a label to it. I'm not trying to put down psychiatrists, but I sometimes think they're a bit like astrologists, because it's kind of like, how should we do it today? But at the same time, it's a really difficult specialty, and a really important one, obviously. So what psychiatrists call mental illness is really the length of time you've had the symptoms for, because we all go up and down. I've got a slide, I teach medical students, and I've got a slide which says, who hasn't had at least one of these? And then who has had 3 or 4? And a lot of hands go up, because we all get those symptoms from time to time. But it's when we're ill is when we get them for a long time, and when we don't function. Does that make sense? Cool. I think there's 3 groups, though. I think there's mental health, and then there's mental illness. And then in the middle, there's stress. And most of the young people I see are stressed. I suspect quite a few of you feel stressed from time to time. What's stress? Not able to cope, yeah. Yeah, acopia. Yeah, yeah. So, and all ages get stressed. Children get stressed. And in the past, I used to think, we used to think, I think, that children don't get stressed, they don't grieve, they're fine, they're oblivious. No. We're now learning that the mental health of babies is vital to their ongoing mental health later. So really important that mental illness can affect every single age group. And stress, I like this definition. It's on the side, I found it on the side of a mug. Stress is the dilemma created in one's mind when one wants to beat the living daylights out of someone who really deserves it. And you can't. But stress is often a dilemma. It's being torn between two things. One thing you want to do, the other thing you want to do, but you can't do both, and what do you do? And yeah? And lots of things feed into it. But healthy stuff, I loved this definition because what I loved about it most was the exercise to be fit, not skinny, eat to nourish your body. The number of times I say to the young people I see, you eat to live. You don't live to eat. You don't eat just when you're hungry. You eat to be able to function well. But always ignore the haters, need my glasses on, the haters, the doubters, and unhealthy examples that were once feeding you, i.e. don't look at Facebook too much. You are worth more than you realize. And a lot of young people need to hear that message. There's a lovely, oh, don't forget sleep. There's a lovely organization, or movement, if you like, called A2 Tangata, which I'd love all young people to take part in, and actually a whole load of adults too. It's three principles. You have value, we succeed together, others matter. I thought those were pretty good principles for actually every age group. And often the issues of young people are very similar to the issues of older people in terms of they've both got great skills, great things to contribute, but are ignored as being too young or too old. But actually all are valuable, and especially when we work together. So me, we, others. But why do we focus so much? Why is mental illness of young people so much in the news these days? Well, I think there's lots of contributors, but it's mostly to do with development. I think I showed you this last time I was here, because nobody gets to come to a talk by me without seeing this cartoon. It always reminds me of 11-year-old boys. You're a teenager now, Lester, your body is changing in ways that are hard to understand. Have you noticed how 11-year-old boys have huge feet? And they're so unco. They don't change much when they're 15, but anyway. But it's all down to puberty. So puberty is when, obviously, the sexual and reproductive hormones start to be produced. And it seems to be connected with the maturation of the brain, the next stage of the maturation of the brain. It takes about 2 or 3 years, and it can be anything between 8 and 16 is when you start. So it's incredibly variable, which is why young people are also different. Takes about 10 years for the brain development to finish, and probably about 2 or 3 years for sexual and reproductive. So there's a bit of a lag time between puberty finishing and brain development finishing, which we didn't realize in the past until we had MRI scans. And in the past, we used to think, oh, yeah, done and dusted, they're grown-ups now, they can have children, off you go. Which for some people might be 12. And we don't do that these days, do we? We don't count 12-year-olds as adults. And quite rightly, because there's a whole load of brain development to happen still. So MRI scans was what kind of triggered all this new research and development of youth health, if you like. I think you've seen these before, but just to remind you, that's an average 5-year-old brain, average 20 to 25-year-old brain. So looking on this side. And there, whoops, there we go. And what's the difference between that one and that one? This is testing your memories from 2 years ago. Yes, well, there's more grey matter. And actually, your peak age for grey matter, this red stuff, is how old? 9. It's all downhill from then on. And the reason why it has to be taken away, and the principle is if it's not used, you lose it, is to make room for all this myelin, which is the stuff shows up blue, and that's all the connections to the cortex, the kind of thinking judgment part of the brain. So again, I'm not sure if you'll remember this. Remember the handy model of brain development? Anybody like to come up and do it? No. Normally I teach with young people, and they're going to be doing it soon. They've seen one, they can practice one, and then they can do the next one. But remember how the brain's a bit like the hand? So my granddaughter keeps telling me that her brain is that size. When you put your knuckles together, apparently that's the size of your brain. I'm not sure. Could be. The handy model is, this is your spinal cord going down the back of your neck, taking messages from the brain to the body, taking them back. Base of the brain, fight, flight, or freeze reaction, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol production, getting you ready to run away or fight. And then all the base of the brain here. Who's a grandparent? Isn't it amazing? You watch it coming online in front of your eyes. Yeah? They're absolutely useless when they're born, can't do a thing, just suck, that's about it. But then you see them. Isn't it wonderful? You see them learning to coordinate movement and see things and focus on faces and hear things and starting to talk. And it's fantastic, isn't it? That all happens first, well, probably even first 5 years of life while it's being perfected, maybe 7. And then just about puberty time, the limbic system, that's the bit in the middle, comes online. And it's all there, but it gets switched on, if you like. And the limbic system has new ways of laying down memory, hence better ways of learning. And most importantly, lots of other things, but most importantly, the amygdala. And the amygdala looks out for danger and threat. And it grows in teenage times. And that's probably when you think about caveman stuff, because this hasn't changed much since caveman stuff. It's because at that stage, you're thrown out of home, you have to start looking for danger yourself. Up till then, your parents did it for you. So your amygdala grows. And then the connection to the cortex happens, all that blue stuff. And the bit behind your forehead, because it's tipped forward in the skull, I call the stress control center. Because that's in connection with your fight, flight, or freeze reaction and your feelings, your amygdala, your kind of feeling safe bit. So that, unfortunately, is only linked up to the limbic system to control the amygdala firing off about 20% of the time in young teenagers, and then it grows. I don't think adults are actually connected 100% of the time. Does anybody feel in control 100% of the time? Nah. So you'll know what it feels like to be thinking with your feelings. Remember that feeling when you lost your keys? And you can't find them? And you're already late? How many times do you look in the same place? You have flipped your lid. You're no longer thinking with your nice logical thought, you're thinking with your emotions. And that's what it's like for teenagers, especially at a young age. So really important, when we're thinking about trying to reduce stress, communication is essential. You need lots of reassurance because your brain's not reassuring you and your amygdala is firing off and you're feeling, ah! Yeah? Don't use logic. Who's got teenagers as grandchildren? Yeah, you've got teenage grandchildren? Great. So I'm going to teach you some good communication stuff. Hopefully you've remembered it from last time, but I'll refresh your memories. Needs lots of reassurance, not logical explanations, reassurance. So, okay, so you've got acne, large ears, long legs, and big feet. I still think you look great, but you're only my mum. But they have a mum that does it. A lot of young people in our world, and New Zealand, or Tatahi, do not have a mum that reassures them. So Anybody and everybody needs to be reassuring, because that's what's so needed. Good communication. So we need to acknowledge that emotion. Okay, don't go, oh, don't worry, dear, there's another boyfriend coming along soon. No, it's the end of the world. You've got to acknowledge it and say, yes, it's the end of the world. I know how you, I don't, never say I know how you feel, because you don't. But I'm trying to understand how you feel. I remember feeling a bit like that. And they'll go, huh? You're too old. But that's all right, you said it. Acknowledge the emotion, but then try and understand where they're at in their cognitive development, because their cognitive development changes. So their ability to future think changes. So how far into the future can a 2-year-old think? They don't have any concept of time, do they? None at all. When I'm very blessed, my Mokapuna lived next door to me. And when one of them was 2, I'd say, bye, Maya, see you tomorrow. And she would cry. I live next door. But for her, tomorrow never came. When I wasn't there, right there, in her presence, I was gone forever. So now she's about 12 or 13, and she can think, how far into the future do you think? What's her concept of time now? Next week? A few weeks? Yeah, probably. If I say to her, often if I say to teenagers of that age, how long have you been with your best friend? What's the commonest response I get is ages. Yeah, you get that response? Ages. So I go, was that last week or the week before? And then often they'll say, oh, a few months, miss. But that's their concept of time. Never talk further ahead than that, because you've lost them. It doesn't exist for them. But then that, really important, because that keeps changing, so keep up with them. You've got to listen all the time. They start thinking abstract concepts as opposed to concrete, literal type thinking. But if they've not got that skill yet, and it may not kick in till 17 or 18 for some people, if they haven't got that skill yet, they won't understand you. They won't understand what you mean by hope, what you truly mean by love, as opposed to the literal, I don't know what some teenagers think love is, but anyway, it gets overused, doesn't it? Complexity of thinking. How many choices would you give your teenage 15-year-old? 2, this or nothing. Yeah, quite right. Because that complexity of thinking isn't quite there. It's only later, some 15-year-olds have got that, but it's only later that you start to be able to think of more than one idea at a time. So these are all really important, because lots of things get in the way of good communication. Trauma is one of them. So if you've been, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but that's really important. That really gets in the way of communication. Loneliness, excessive demands. Sometimes I think the teenagers today have so much on their plates. Disability of any sort, especially things like ADHD and autism. Genetics. My daughter keeps telling me, well, you bonded me. You've got to choose the right parents. Being overwhelmed. You know, our lives are so fast. People want a response yesterday. And it's very overwhelming. All the contacts on Facebook, there's too many for our brains to cope with. Drugs and alcohol get in the way. So lots of things get in the way, which means we've got to get better at that good communication. So what do young people need to develop well? Connectedness to a caring adult is the main thing. But to family, to schools, to community, they need opportunity to contribute, to participate in decision-making in a group, and they need opportunities to develop a skill. So what is connectedness? Got any ideas?
Good communication.
Good, absolutely. In order, what's the result of good communication? Yeah, absolutely, get good relationships. So relationships that have providing a sense of belonging. Yeah? So really important protective factor is a family you can feel you belong to, or a group you feel to belong to. Youth groups are amazing. They provide an awesome opportunity for young people to feel they belong. They don't have to believe in God, but they belong to the group. Consistent. Consistency is so important. When you think about the number of marriages that are split up and kids having 4 lots of parents sometimes, consistency just is really difficult to provide. You have to be super duper parents to provide that consistency. And especially after a relationship breakdown, it's really hard to do. Giving that loving support that's predictable. Connectedness, really important. They also added regulation, the importance of rules and structure so you know where you stand. Really, really helpful. You know what's expected of you. You don't feel frightened anymore. And that mutual respect. As their capacity grows, their competency grows, then they're allowed to do more. So that mutual respect of growing competency and skills. And now research is really looking at trying to create an environment that provides all that. And that's what we're trying to do at the Hub. Provide an environment that creates connectedness. So that's our real aim. But the other things that can help with connectedness is routine. So family meals. There's been a big research, Youth 2000 study. Have you come across that? If you just Google Youth 2000, it's on the Auckland University website, and there's data there from a wave of asking high school students, random sample of all high school students in New Zealand, and they had a whole load of raft of questions in 2001, in 2007, in 2012, and just recently 2019. And there's masses of data there about all sorts of things about young people. But one of the analyses that they did was looking at family meals and seeing how that related to risk behaviors. And what they showed was that if you have a family meal every day of the week, it halves binge drinking. It halves current smoking. It halves suicidal thinking. Who would have guessed? And even if you only have a family meal 3 or 4 times a week, that helps. Some houses don't even have a table to have a family meal around. And we all know the problems with nutrition at the moment, with escalating prices. So it's really important that these kind of routines and traditions are kept going because they're so important for mental health. When it doesn't happen, there's disaster. So this was a study in San Diego in 1995, and it was a study of a group of, I guess you'd call it a medical insurance group. So it's called Kaiser Permanente. And only fairly well-off white Americans belong to them because they're the only ones with enough money to belong to them. So these are fairly well-off group of people. And what they said, they did a survey to ask them what kind of things had happened to them under 18 growing up. And they found that people who had victims of any kind of abuse, or actually part of a natural disaster, living through a natural disaster, or living with an alcohol or drug misuser in the household, or somebody who's in and out of jail, or somebody who's chronically depressed, mentally ill, or witnessing violence, or had no parents, nobody to guide them, those people suffered a great deal. What do you think the proportion was of those who had none of those in their lives in this particular group in San Diego? What do you think the proportion was? That's right, nil. A third had none of those. A third. But these were, people who were well off. What happens is that when you are abused like that, your amygdala grows before it should. And so you're constantly on alert. and producing adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And as you know, it affects the whole body. So the brain's on alert all the time, can't concentrate, doesn't sleep properly, the heart's always pounding, the lungs are breathing too fast, so they get worn out more quickly, the guts are churning like mad, and you feel sick and sometimes get chronic diarrhea, and bladder has problems. Everybody's been for a nervous pee. Can you imagine that all the time? Your muscles and your joints are held firm. And there'll be somebody here who's feeling like that. If you do, and you want to leave, please, be reassured. It can get better. But it affects the whole body, every bit. So it's not surprising that we get this as a result, where you have the adverse childhood experiences, your neurodevelopment's disrupted, your amygdala doesn't shut up, it keeps going all the time. It's hard to regulate your emotions. So you have terrible health risk behaviors of all sorts, infections, cancers, because your immunity's gone down, and early death. Now, they used to say if we stopped smoking, that would save the country billions. If we stopped adverse child experiences, it would save the country trillions, never mind all the mental distress. Because it's not just one person, it's the whole family that's affected. It's society that's affected. Because when you're brought up by somebody who's not able to control their emotions, you learn not to be able to control your emotions. And we also know that it affects your genetics. So there's a thing called epigenetics. Have you come across epigenetics? It's when your environment affects your genes. So you can hand that down. The good news is it can be reversed. But this is really serious stuff. And this, to me, is the grounding of most mental illness, especially the preventable mental illness. You can't prevent inheriting genes for schizophrenia and psychosis, but you can avoid disrupting development. That's all of our responsibility. Difficult to do. These are two great books, if you're interested in reading a bit more. The Body Keeps the Score is 30 years' experience of research into this stuff, but also into therapies that work. So really great book to look at. What else can help? Well, this is a really interesting study. They looked at positive childhood experiences. And what they found was if you had at least 3 or 4 of these, you had less likelihood of developing depression as an adult. So hopefully, the very fact that you are all here means that you had at least 3 or 4 of these happen in your lives. Would you equate with that? And when I talk to medical students, I get them to imagine 4 caring adults that aren't family members. Most of them can. That's why they're at medical school. They've had that support all the way through. So all of us can be that person who gives them that support. And grandparents are so important. Study after study coming through now to say how important grandparents are. Young people say, don't overprotect me. I might have gone through hell and back, but don't try and protect me from war because I won't learn from that. Let me grow up, let me make mistakes. Don't try to control everything. Don't invade my privacy. Don't baby me. Don't make me dependent on you. And this is true for any chronic illness, never mind stuff that's happened to you. But they did say, help me make my own decisions. Give me support in making those decisions. And enjoy talking things over with me. Because that's what helps you make a decision, when you talk over stuff, yeah? They like to be able to make their own decisions, and they love you to talk to them in a warm, friendly voice. Really key. And smile a lot. It's helpful. That's the trouble with masks, isn't it? You can't see everybody smiling at you. So it's going to be interesting. Anybody like to do a study into the effect of masks on babies? I think some people are. It's going to be interesting, isn't it? I suppose they'll just get used to it. But yeah, fascinating. So what can we do? We can change the environment in which we live by doing all that connectedness stuff. And we can do collective action. We can actually focus on groups. That's why U3A is such, all these groups are really good, but we need more for young people as well, so that they can belong and actually have all that support. Collective action, cooperation, not competition. We've grown up with 30 years of competition, me first, I'm the only thing that matters. And we're reaping the rewards at the highest inflation rate for 30 years. This is the reward. So we need to say, let's ditch competition, in my view. Let's cooperate, work together, us together, so that we can get a good outcome for everybody. And let's have people taking responsibility for that rather than counting whether they've done it or not. Okay. Health and education, how should we do that? Well, I like this one. Raving on about teachers and how dreadful they are, but then off you go to school, dear. Because you don't want them at home. Lockdown's been terrible. So for some parents, they've enjoyed lockdown, I think. It's brought out the teacher in them. But I'm not sure if the children have enjoyed their parent being a teacher. But perhaps if we got back to that service model, we remove the cost barriers, we remove all those individual barriers of stigma and embarrassment, and we increase the availability of all services for all and invest money in them. The European World Bank part of Europe actually showed that if you put in $4 into health, if you put $1 into health, you get $4 back in return, long term. And if you put $1 into education, you get $8 back. It pays to invest. I liked this little cartoon. I thought we were going to play doctors and nurses. We are. I'm waiting for my 6 months first appointment. It's a bit close to the bone, though, isn't it? So what do we want to do at the Youth Hub? Well, we want to put all that stuff into action. We want to enable young people in Otatahi to have that opportunity to lead healthy, safe, and valued lives and overcome the systems that stop that, fulfill their potential, and contribute to their community, not just in the future, but now. Our values are that we want to ensure that Te Tiriti is our founding document, Tiriti, and that we work together with Māori, and I'll tell you a little bit about the design that we're working with Ngāi Tahu. We want to use youth development, positive youth development, as our founding kind of theme, if you like. Encouraging young people to be partners, engaging them with warmth, acceptance and respect, focusing on their abilities and strengths, and believing in them, believing that positive growth is possible. So that's our values, and these are all the organisations who are going to come and join us in that, and they all have similar values. So 298, the Youth Health Centre, that's where I work part-time as a GP, and the Collaborative Trust, which is a research and training trust, Qtopia, which supports young people who are, let me get this right, LGBTQI+. So people who are gender and sexual orientation diverse. City Mission are going to help with, by providing their youth alcohol and other drug counsellors and work out of our venue. Yellow Brick Road used to be supporting families, and they've changed their kind of label, I guess, trying to be more positive in terms of supporting families towards mental well-being, rather than kind of going in there to help with mental illness. Christchurch Methodist Mission is going to run the housing, and Cultivate's actually dropped out, but and they were going to help run the garden on the rooftop. But what I thought it would be a much better idea, actually, would be to approach Age Concern or U3A members to see if there's any volunteers who'd like to come and run gardening programs, growing veggies mostly, on the roof, so that young people can learn from older people the skills of producing vegetables. So that's what we're hoping that will happen. Family Works and probably Concol, they provide youth workers to help young people who are struggling on the independent youth benefit. Voice is an organisation that supports young people who've been in state care or who are transitioning out of state care. Te Kura is the correspondence school. Shakti helps with young female women refugees. We'll get some government agencies coming in. We thought we'd give them one room that they could share and keep all the hot air in one place. They thought that was a good idea too. Having said that, Orangutan Mariki and voice don't get on all that well, as you can imagine. So hopefully we can contribute to better relationships. School nurses will have an office there or hot desk space there. Youth Line will come in and run their phone support service from there. Catapult Employment will help young people get jobs. Community Law will come and give legal advice. So there's a whole collection of organisations. Some of you will be there permanently and others will just come in and interview people and have hot desk space. So what we're hoping is that it'll be a safe place with all those things we've talked about that create mental health. We're hoping that it will give an opportunity to access training and employment and actually being your own boss, learning how to do that. Legal advice, creativity, because creativity is so important, whether it be music, whether it be art, whether it be dancing, so important for mental health. Absolutely, so therapeutic in terms of especially recovering from trauma. And obviously sport, fitness, all that kind of stuff. And the picture there is the kahikatea tree. And Naitaho have been working with us, looking at how can we fit that into the design. And it's a beautiful picture, because I don't know if you knew, I didn't know, but the kahikatea tree is the tallest tree in the forest. It grew on swampland, because obviously it grew with all that water. But the way it kept stable, because swampland is pretty unstable, was that interlacing roots that gave it the strength. And what we hope is that the hub will be those interweaving roots that give the tree the strength to grow tall as they move out of the hub into adulthood. So I thought that was a beautiful picture of what we're trying to do. So that's going to be our theme in the design, or incorporated into the design. And thanks to, we looked for land, started looking for land in probably about 2012 actually. We tested the concept of organisations working together in Barbados Street, and it worked well. We had some evaluation done. All the managers of the organisations thought it was fantastic. And from then on, because where we landed were very short-term rentals, from then on we started looking for land to build something that was purposeful and would fit the ticket, and we wouldn't have to keep moving all the time because landlords want to sell from under us. And so we looked for land and eventually found this piece of land on Salisbury Street, which is the old bowling club, 109 Salisbury Street. And Anglican Care very generously bought it for us. So we now have a lease with them, and it's beautifully central city, but also residential, which has its drawbacks, because obviously a residential area doesn't really want to use its hub right in the middle of it. Well, not quite, we're on the edge of it. But having said that, I think they've realised that the neighbours around us have realised that actually it's going to contribute to their community. And, you know, going to have fresh veggies right on the doorstep. Beautiful performances of drama and music. The CSO has said they'll come down and teach people how to play instruments. So there's going to be really, there'll be a cafe inside. So hopefully that'll be contributing to their community. But also it's near the Margaret Mayhew programme. It's actually, you can go to the bus exchange, go straight up Colombo Street and you're there. Turanga, the Metro Sports, when eventually gets finished, all in handy distance. This is what it will look like from the air. So this is Salisbury Street. So if you can see on this one, this is Salisbury Street. And this will be like a greeting ferry, so that it's a drop-in, so that some young people might not get further than that, but hopefully we'll then draw them in to the rest. So behind that will be the Creative Arts Centre and the Event Centre, and this will be a half-court basketball. I didn't believe how much room a basketball court takes. It's way bigger than a rugby pitch. It's incredible. That's just a half court. It's quite a big area. We'll have a sail over it to help with the noise, but also the weather. And then here is the hostel housing. So that would have 20 beds, 10 on the top, 10 on the bottom, and they'll have 2 rooms for live-in youth workers who'll be there 24/7 in a team. And they'll teach, be there for support, but also teach living skills, budgeting, how to pay the rent, because they'll be paying rent, but it'll be income-related rent. And that's for 16 to 24-year-olds. The whole facility will be for 13 or 12 to 24. So they'll all have their own courtyards and washing line on the rooftop here. And there'll be a quiet room for computers and things like that, doing homework, stuff like that. And then the link through will be to the services block, which is here. And the entrance to the service, there'll be a back entrance. I think that'll be the exit entrance, but some people will come straight into that way rather than going all through. And then the services block will have all the wraparound services that we've just talked about. And then here are townhouses. And they will be on Gracefield Ave, and there'll be 3 beds in each townhouse, 4 in one of them, so that we have 2 disability rooms for people in wheelchairs on the ground floor of one of them. We're not sure whether to have families in those, or maybe only in 1 or maybe 2 of young parents with young children, because there's very few places that they can go. So we might have apartments for them. And the idea is that whichever housing you're in, you need to be looking for a job or in training. And you can stay for 3 to 18 months, so it's definitely transition. It's not forever. And we almost need to make a plan for where you're going to go next when you come in. Not quite that bad, but nearly. Because we don't want it to be full all the time so that next people can't come in. And the 298 youth workers will probably be in charge of the triaging of who gets in. But hopefully we'll be able to take as many as we can, because housing is absolutely vital. Too many young people living in emergency housing in motels at the moment. Children growing up in motels is not good. So we really want to help fill that gap where there's get the housing better. And then that's what the greeting ferry will look like from Salisbury Street. We were going to have a bike rack outside, and there's a hoist to go up to the greenhouse. We probably only have 1 or 2 greenhouses now. We were going to cover the roof with greenhouses, but it'd probably be greenhouses and then garden beds, because that soaks up the rain, and we don't have to have extra water tanks to get rid of the rain. We just use it to help grow things. If we can afford it, and at the moment it doesn't look like we can, we'll try and get some recirculation and filtering of the rainwater so we can be self-sufficient in water. But that's quite costly to put that kind of plant in, but love to be able to. And then the townhouses across the Gracefield Ave with the back entrance into the sporting houses, and a weird caretaker's cottage there. So they'll be the kind of support people. The office manager may well have a room there as well, but we'll kind of see who applies for the job. Great retirement job. Okay. The way the build is going is that we hope to start demolition and ground preparation, putting in the foundations and all that, taking away the contaminated soil, start next month. We will do the hostel housing and the wraparound services first, because that's what we have money from the government for, the hostel housing and the wraparound services. So that we have guaranteed funding for that, we can go ahead. For the rest of the stages, we need way more in the kitty before we can start. So we're going to build in 2 stages. We're hoping that maybe we can get some more government funding for housing, for the apartments, the townhouses, but we'll have to see. But it's a real need for this age group. And then the creativity and the arts centre and the cafe, that will be added on. Band practice rooms next to the event centre. That will be added on when we've got some guarantee of funding. We don't want to start anything we can't finish. and then the greeting ferry on last, and all the greenhouses on the roof after that. So that's the plan. We'll be halfway there, and we're actually doing a design so that the hostel and the wraparound service can be standalone for quite a while we get them, if we need more time for getting more money. But we'd love to get that money in the next 2 years so we can build seamlessly, but we're making sure that we can make that a standalone if that doesn't come to pass straight away. But we have every confidence because the need is enormous. Got to do something. We've got to stop all the waiting times at Hill Morton, because actually doing this will cut down the referrals. There's no doubt about it. So we've got to do something now. So thank you for having me. Thanks for all your support, and hopefully there's lots of questions.
Thank you, Dame. So I'm sure there will be some questions, and those who are asking them, please use the microphone at the back and state your name, please. I'll ask one from here. It seems to me as if things are not going that well at home. The school teacher is incredibly important. Could you talk a little bit about how well trained they are, ongoing training for the teachers? Because, I mean, we all have had good experiences and bad with teaching. Just a little bit about teachers.
Absolutely. I always think if you've got an unsupportive home, but you've got a supportive school, you're going to be okay. If you've got an unsupported school but a supportive home, you're going to be okay. If you've got nothing in either, you need a one-stop shop. But I think teachers have huge influence, and I'm sure all of you can remember a teacher who was pretty contributory to your life. I don't think the training is good enough in terms of being able to learn about your youth development. It's great on teaching skills and kind of control of the classroom and your own subject matter, but we need teachers to understand youth development, especially that cognitive development, because at the moment it's not taught. I think it's changing, but that's really important in my view. We're really working hard at the moment to try and change school-based health services, because only decile 1 to 5 schools have got them, unless you've got in a school that actually pays for a nurse. And if health services and counselling and youth workers and teachers work together, can you imagine how much better students will learn? Because what the teachers need to realise is that health services prepare young people to learn better. So if we can work together more, so that's what we're trying to do at the moment. Hopefully we'll hear soon about whether we've got a contract to do that, and actually help teachers and health professionals work together better so they can actually focus on that whole development stuff.
So thank you very much for your wonderful address. You and I go back quite a long way, as you know. One of the issues that concerns me is the dependence on cell phones and the way in which they're used to communicate with one another. And I heard on the radio yesterday some statistics that have come out about loneliness. And apparently there is a very high proportion of loneliness in teenagers. And I wondered whether you could comment on that.
Thank you, Sally. And I want to acknowledge Sally because she was right in there right at the very beginning of us making plans and was so full of advocacy for housing, and helped us develop a whole business plan to develop supported housing. But then we enlarged it into having the whole thing. But yes, so thank you. I wanted to acknowledge your big contribution there, Sally, so thank you. But yes, cell phones, it's really interesting. I went into 298 to do a clinic yesterday, yes, Tuesday I was there, and then again yesterday. And the phones weren't working properly. And the internet wasn't working properly. Fortunately, our practice management system was working okay. But if they'd all been down, we would have had to tell people to go to home. Isn't that ridiculous? So it's not just young people who are dependent on phones, it's the whole of our society. And they have a computer in their hand. And I think the worry is, because it's new and it's a technology that's all enveloping, it's very addictive. It actually tends to rule out people. So you think you're dealing with a person, but you're not really. So that touch, being in somebody's presence, it has actually underlined the fact that that's important. The lockdowns have underlined it as well. I mean, pandemics have underlined it, because when we separate from each other, our mental health suffers. We need that absolutely kind of being in each other's presence thing, what all of that involves to actually avoid loneliness. We think cell phones will avoid it, but you've got to do both. I say to teenagers, you don't have to throw away your phone. I reassure parents that that's okay, but you've got to do both. You've got to have physical presence as well. Otherwise, you suffer from loneliness, which probably leads to depression. Probably one of the commonest causes of depression. So keep them, but use them wisely, and do both. Yeah.
Ken Mitchell, talking to my young ones who are in their 40s, 50s, they tell me that young ones not interested in getting married any longer, right? And they don't really want to have children. And I just wondered what, I'm 80 now, but what the future holds, and is this true or a lot of hearsay?
Well, I think it's true that people don't want to have children so much anymore. Look at Japan. It's almost come to a full stop because there's so many more older people than younger people, because the birth rate is now less than replacement. It's less than replacement in most of Europe. It's getting less than replacement in New Zealand. So there's so many factors that go into that. When they say, I don't want to bring children into this world because it's such a terrible world, I'm sorry, it's always been a terrible world. And, we've now got the ability to stop having children in terms of reliable contraception. But at the same time, what I think we need to bring back, which I think is going, we need to reinforce it though, is hope. And if you haven't got hope, you're not going to have children. But I think that generations before have had more hope than the generation now. And we need to actually bring back hope. And we've just done a research project. It'll go up on our website very soon. Young people interviewing other young people about what they think hope is. It's really eye-opening. So I'll let you know when it's up on the website. Do read it. Because we all need to grow hope, I think. Because then we might have children again. And I think in terms of getting married, I'm not surprised they don't want to get married. They've watched too many relationships break up. And it fills them with hopelessness about whether a relationship will last. So thank you for...
Yeah, thank you, because I think myself, when I look back at my life, the greatest thing I ever found was falling in love.
Yes.
And having children. And I thank Hollywood for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think people still fall in love, Ken. There is hope. Bring back more love.
Thank you, Sue, for your very interesting talk. My name's Bronwyn Meek. This really follows on from the gentleman before me, because although you say we've always had a terrible world, actually, I can't think of a time where I've ever felt so hopeless about the world myself, and it's largely to do with climate change and the ongoing wars and the destruction of the environment in particular. And I'm wondering whether you see any of that coming through in young people today, their concern for the future of the world with regard to those particular issues.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've seen a bit of it happening overseas in the UK, but perhaps not so much here in New Zealand. So if you could comment on that.
I think you're absolutely right. Climate change is the biggest thing. If there've been loads of surveys done, and young people, when they're asked what the biggest issue is for them today, they say climate change. Mental health and climate change. And the mental health, they're linked. You're absolutely right. And I think the hopelessness comes from the fact that the politicians seem to be absolutely deafened to their cries. And they kind of get up and do school strikes and goodness knows what, and nobody listens. Well, they don't seem to, because there's no action. And why is there no action? Well, my view is that the world is controlled by big business. That's why there's no action. Politicians don't control it. Business does. And the oil and the fuel industries and the mining industries and all those things that have contributed to climate change refuse to change, refuse to go broke. I don't blame them. But at the same time, shouldn't they be looking at how they can make money out of something else? Solar power, wind power. No, if they actually put all their billions into that, they wouldn't go broke by giving up using oil. That I could rave on for hours. Don't get me started. But yes, you're quite right. Young people worry about it a lot. And I think it contributes to hopelessness because nobody's doing anything. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do our bit and recycle, reuse, and recreate.
Thank you, Tony. I hope this is all on. So it gives me so much pleasure to be able to thank you today, because you are such a passionate and powerful advocate for youth development, and you've been doing this for decades, as I think back to the past. My head is spinning actually, because you've given us so much practical information, and the first part of the lecture I would really hope that we might be able to obtain and put up on our website, because as a grandparent I'd just like to go and read that stuff again. But you've also given us, you've shown us how we can make a difference for the young people in our circles, our families, our friends, and our wider community. And I think the Youth Hub, what a marvellous, marvellous development, and it was wonderful to hear the detail of that today. So, thank you so much, and please accept this from us, but it will be no surprise to you that, of course, this is going towards the Youth Hub, and that wonderful work.
Thank you very much. And if anybody knows any, billionaires could drop a few thousand our way, we're on the website. Just, fill in the form. Thank you.